We had so many dreams. It was going to be perfect, wasn't it? Jetpacks and hoverboards. It didn't quite work out that way. Thanks very much for having me back here, guys. This is the third time in a row I've come back to NDC in Oslo. Some of you know I'm from Australia, which is a long way away from everywhere. And when I go away, my kids sort of go, well, where are you going? What are you going to do? And I have to tell them that every time I go away, and particularly every time I come to Oslo, it's enormously hard work. I get very little time to relax or have any fun. The only thing I've really done here is prepared my talks, worked hard, done workshops, user groups. I can't remember having any actual downtime. It's never much fun. Always hard work coming to Oslo, isn't it? I do eventually fall off, sooner or later. I don't show the kids this, otherwise they'll go, what on earth do you do? But one of the things I do try and do with the kids, I've got little kids, they're 3 and 6 years old, and I like to find out a little bit about the place that I'm going to before I go, and I tell them, this is where Daddy's going. So I was looking for some information around this part of the world, being sort of the Scandinavia, Northern Europe area. And I found some really interesting information about Donald Duck. I don't know, a lot of you people may not know this. It's actually about Sweden. And what I found is that in Sweden, they love Donald Duck so much, they actually had to make it illegal to vote for him. Is this true? Found it on the internet. Apparently it's true. Something odd about Sweden. Is there any Swedish people here? Oh, shit. But my kids are looking at this and going, why on earth would you vote for some crazy, angry, irrational character called Donald? And I think Sweden may be onto something here that we may be able to actually learn from across the rest of the world. Hello, international visitors. But as I said, my kids are 3 and 6. And I was sort of interested in the way technology is for them now compared to when I was that age. And I was born in the 70s. And I look back at how things were in the 70s. It's a lot of disco, apparently, in the 70s. I don't remember a lot of what happened in the 70s. But in the 70s, people were actually starting to get online. Now, it wasn't modern-day internet like we think of today, but there was the concept of being able to connect to online services. Now, one of the interesting things is that back then, and even into the 80s and a good part of the 90s, getting online was a process. You got online. So these days, we are online, right? So we're online at home. As we drive to the office, we're online because we've got 3G, 4G, all this sort of thing. And then we get there and we're still online. So much more of a process back in the 70s and 80s. And I thought I'd find a little bit of information. I found this interesting video. This is from a UK television program called Database. And we've got Julian and Pat here. And Julian and Pat have got one of these old Prestel computers. Everything was very beige in the 70s too, wasn't it? Julian was beige, the wallpaper was beige. So anyway, these guys are going to get online. I want to show you this little video about what it took to get online back in the 70s.
The computer's asking me if I want to log on, and it's now telling me to phone up the main Prestel computer, which I will now do.
So it's a very simple connection to make.
Extremely simple. And I can actually leave the modem plugged in once it's done that without affecting the telephone. I'm now waiting for the computer to answer me. It asks with a tone, and then I just flick a switch on the modem and replace the receiver. And
things are starting to happen.
Things are starting to happen. The Prestel computer is now asking me to enter my own personal password, which I've now done.
Now, there are multiple very interesting things about this. So first of all, they're on a computer, but they're on the TV, right? So one of the things about early computers is that you didn't have like these nice flat screen monitors. You didn't even have dedicated screens. You would go and you'd use a TV. Sometimes it would be colour TV in the 70s and into the 80s. This is what these guys are doing. So I found that sort of interesting. Just a reminder, this is how it used to work. The other thing is it's a very simple connection, isn't it? So all you have to do is pick up the handset and then on your rotary dial telephone, and back again, and then the computer talks to you with all those squeals and beeps, and then you hang it up after you've got all the plugs just right. And this is what it meant to get online. There was one other thing there at the end, which struck me as a security guy as kind of interesting as well. And just in case you didn't quite see it, let's give it a little bit of a slow-mo. This is where Julian enters his password. What do you reckon his password is? So even though the computers have changed fundamentally, the one thing that we still continually screw up is our passwords. Like, this stuff hasn't changed. We've still got this problem well into today. So it's interesting how some stuff changes fundamentally and other stuff we've just still got the same old problems, same old tech. But this machine that Julian was using here is called a Prestel. And the Prestel was a very early machine, quite obviously, and it was one of the very early experiences of getting online. And when you got online with the Prestel, it could communicate at 1200 baud. Now, many people probably don't even know what a baud is because we don't talk about a baud anymore. There are 1 million bauds in a megabit. So when we think about megabits per second, and if we got 1 megabit per second today, we'd go, it's a bit crap. That is still about 1,000 times faster than what you're getting with the Prestel. So that's how fundamentally different our connectivity has changed. But what's really interesting is you look at connectivity today and some of the places that we get it and the sort of speeds that we get. So a really good example is you can be on a nice modern plane today, like an A380, and you can have Wi-Fi in the sky, which when you think about it, it's kind of amazing, right? It's like you're flying through the air across continents and you can have Wi-Fi, which is just magical. Yet some people complain that it's crap. What is wrong with these people? That's still 70 times faster than what a Prestel could run. 70 times faster than what you got with that very simple connection while you're at home. And it's really interesting how fundamentally different our views of connectivity have changed. I'm from Australia, so our views of connectivity aren't real good down there. But it's very, very different. Now, of course, the reason we're able to do this, the reason we're able to be at 40,000 feet doing 900k an hour and communicating over the internet is because mobile, right? So mobile, we know, has gotten very big. And it's interesting when you look at the way mobile has evolved. And if we think back to when we started seeing mobile phones, many of us can think back to when we started seeing mobile phones. We've got to remember we started seeing mobile phones in the early 90s. There's going to be a bunch of people in this room who weren't born then, which makes some of us start to realise how old we're getting. But there was this trend, right? So in the early 90s, we started with these big sort of brick phones, called them bricks. So they were literally the size of bricks. Some of them weren't much lighter. And then as we progressed, we got smaller and smaller and smaller. And this was the feature, right? Like, how small can my phone be? Because now I can start to put it in my pocket. And they started getting more fully featured. They started getting faster processors. So by the time we got through to the early 2000s, we started getting phones that not only could you put in your pocket, but they were powerful enough to play Snake. Which meant now you had something to do on the toilet as well, right? Because before you had something else to do. Because before there was only like one thing you could do in there, or read newspapers. And this started to change, right? We got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then we got to this period in the early 2000s, and we kind of regressed. But on the other hand, we got even more powerful, and we got bigger and bigger screens. And this was great, because as things got more powerful and as we got bigger screens, we could do a lot more with it. And most of us, you know, we're technical people. For us, this is fantastic. Like, nothing bad can come of having these mobile phones with big screens. Other people weren't so happy. Other people said, the problem we have now is nobody talks to each other anymore. Everybody sits there and they look at their mobile phones and they don't talk to anybody next to them. And this is a problem that we have never had before. This is a brand new thing. But of course it's not. It's the same problem, in that most of us just like to sit there and ignore other people. Same problem, just manifests itself in a different way. When we think about mobile phones, and particularly when we think about smartphones, we probably think about this. So this is sort of the era that we think about with smartphones. All kicked off with the iPhone in 2007. Now, when Jobs launched the iPhone, he described it very clearly.
Introducing a truly magical, wonderful, pretty amazing, far better, amazing, great, amazing.
And that's basically Steve Jobs' keynote, right? Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Everyone applauds. Everyone applauded anything for Steve Jobs. When he launched the iPhone in 2007, not everyone thought it was quite so magical.
Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
So, allegedly, the iPhone was no good. But in Steve Ballmer's defense, you've got to think about where he was coming from. Windows Mobile had a good, solid market share throughout the early 2000s. It was a good device. They did well. And he believed that was the way forward, Windows Mobile. Who here has a Windows Mobile phone? I found him. He's over here. He's the guy. Should get a photo or something later. Send it to Microsoft. They'll love it. I found the Windows guy. But in all seriousness, obviously, Ballmer didn't read that market particularly well. And it's actually interesting seeing these two guys together, seeing Steve Jobs and Steve Ballmer, because we often look at Jobs and we say, well, Jobs was the showman, right? Like he was the person that could excite the crowd and get everyone engaged like no one else could. And he particularly did that around the iPhone era, around 2007, then into the iPad era. And Jobs was very good at that, but people forget that Ballmer was very, very good at that, a long time before the iPhone even launched.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Ballmer!
I'm going to mute Steve there because he does go on a little bit. This was Microsoft's 25th anniversary in 2000, and Steve was enormously excited about this. He's still going. You can find Steve online. You go to Google or YouTube and you search for monkey dance, and this is what it's become known as, is the monkey dance. But he did certainly get people excited. Steve's no longer with Microsoft. He's moved on. But it's quite a sort of an interesting era this whole time when we started getting these mobile devices, and particularly when that iPhone sort of arrived and we started to get this really competitive market space around phones. And phones these days are very competitive, right? Like everybody is trying to get their product out there and they're trying to have these points of differences. But it's not just phones, it's accessories as well, and there are a lot of phone accessories out there competing for market share. And it's really interesting when you start to look at what some of these accessories actually do. So for example, I found this one. Now, you know how the theory is that we need all-in-one devices. And someone has looked at the marketplace and said, well, we've got one device that does email, Twitter, Facebook, another device that does perfume. Why is this? Like, why can't we combine these two things together and have a per phone? That's what they call it, it's a per phone. Now, if you're a guy looking at this going, well, this looks really good, but what's out there for me? You know, this is a very feminine sort of product. You can get per phone for men as well. So it goes both genders, which is nice. They're being very inclusive. If you're looking at this and thinking, well, I still can't figure out how do I put perfume on myself with my phone, they've got this little video. And we've got this guy, he's talking on the phone here, he's having a business meeting. He goes, I might smell a bit shit, you know, maybe we should fix this. He grabs the phone, turns it around, and then he sprays it on his neck, which is fine, and then he smells his wrist. I don't know why. Maybe someone who understands perfumes and things better than me can explain that. But this is the thing, the per phone. So this sort of accessories for mobile has become a really big marketplace. And of course, one of the really big things in the marketplace for phone accessories is a selfie stick. Someone recently went around, they took all these movies with guns in them and they replaced the guns with a selfie stick. So it's like now we got Arnie, and he never looks as scary, right, when he's just selfieing. John Wayne. I like the Hello Kitty phone cover as well. I think that's a nice touch. The problem is that selfie sticks are just bloody annoying, right? Like, they are absolutely painful seeing people try to use them. And they're so annoying that they've started to get banned in a bunch of places. So, for example, in theme parks. So you go to a lot of theme parks now, you're not allowed to have a selfie stick. It's banned, which is good. We support that. Same with zoos. A lot of zoos are banning them. Now, I particularly like this shot because this guy has obviously been so pissed off with the ban on the selfie sticks. He's taken his own selfie stick to take a photo of it next to the sign about no selfie sticks, but he's not selfieing with it. He's using another phone to take one of the phone on the end of the selfie stick, which is taking a photo of the monkey, which is a nice little, gesture on his part, I guess. Now, one of the other things that we see a lot on the internet is people want to involve their pets in everything, right? And we often think about cats being sort of the canonical internet pet. But there are a lot of people out there that want to be able to combine things like the selfie with their pets. So you can get a device like this. This is a pooch selfie, right? And what you do is you clip it on the top of your phone. You put a ball on the phone, and then the dog really intently stares at the ball, and it looks like he's looking at the camera. Look at the dog, like he's focusing, right? This thing works. So we're involving our pets in this way. Now, dogs is an interesting one too, because dogs have a bit of a history with the internet. Everyone thinks it's cats. There's an interesting sort of historical, very poignant point where dogs made an appearance about an observation of internet anonymity. It was in this cartoon. So in this cartoon, this was in 1993 in the New Yorker. It says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. And this was a very important observation at the time, because in 93, there were very, very few people on the internet, very early days. And what the New Yorker was saying was that when you go on the internet, you can be anybody, right? It doesn't matter what race or gender or sexuality you are. It doesn't matter if you're Swedish, any of these things. You can be anyone you like. And think about it back then, right? We suddenly went, wow, this is amazing. We've got this anonymity. We can go online, we can chat to people on the other side of the world, we can pretend to be whoever we want to be. And we thought that was fantastic, and we got away with that for about 20 years. And then this happened. Right? So now, as of about 2013, courtesy of Snowden leaks, we realised that not only does the NSA know you're a dog, they know what type of dog you are, they know which other dog's butts you're sniffing, they know what sort of dog food you like, they know everything about you, and what we found was it's actually the opposite of what we thought in 93. It's not that we have more anonymity, we actually have a lot less anonymity than what we ever had before. So we're sort of coming to grips with this issue of privacy on the internet, and how do we deal with the fact that we want to have privacy and be a dog or whatever we want to be, but we also want to be able to have communications. Now, it's not just the NSA and governments either. So we've seen other cases where our online privacy has been seriously eroded. So we've seen things like this last year. So this was Ashley Madison, and what happened with Ashley Madison is in August last year, Ashley Madison, which is a website designed for you to have an affair. Like, that is the only reason it's there. It's not a porn site, it's not a dating site, it is there to have an affair. So they got hacked, and they had about 30 million records of people exposed publicly, really sensitive data. So things like your sexuality, your preferences once you are in the bedroom with the person that you're seeking. All these really sensitive things. And Ashley Madison obviously had a really hard time of this because people now no longer wanted to use the service. And they said, okay, what we've got to do is we've got to come up with a way of regaining people's trust. So how do we get people's trust to come back to the site and create accounts? And I want to show you what they did. I've got to demo this because you won't believe it unless you see it. So what I'm going to do is just jump over to this other machine, and we're going to create an Ashley Madison account. Now, when I prepared for this, I forgot my wife was going to be in the audience too. This is a research account. research. All right, so here's what we're going to do. On Ashley Madison, we've got to start by choosing what we're going to be. And we'll try and make this a little bit realistic. We'll be an attached male, seeking females. And then what's going to happen is it takes us over to the next page where we've got to start filling out data. So we sort of fat finger this, we put in a bunch of rubbish here. I don't think they care too much about passwords after what happened to them, so we'll put in whatever we want. We can be Norwegian, we'll just whack in a postcode here. Fat finger that will do. Limits. What are our limits going to be? Cyber affair. Let's grab that. And then we just fill in, I don't think any of this really matters for these purposes. And that guy, full-sized. Eye colour, hair colour. And then we fill in some info here, which I'm sure that's a perfectly valid email address. And we go to the next screen. Now, the problem is that we've got to have anonymity, but we've also got to have a profile picture, right? And this is where it gets tricky. So what we're going to do is we'll take a profile picture. Go here, take picture. Like so. That looks perfect. We'll save that. Now, don't worry, darling. You'll see the anonymity thing in a moment. That's fine. So we'll save that. Yoink. Now we go over here and we add the discrete photo. But this photo is not actually discrete yet. We're going to make it discrete. And this is the magic of what Ashley Madison have created. So what we do is we position this in the right spot, like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to choose... Should we be Zorro? Let's be Zorro. Right? And we can actually... Oh man, that doesn't work very well on this machine. What you can actually do is you can position the mask. So you drag the mask over the eyes and then you grab the handles and you stretch it so it covers your eyes, and then it's no longer me, you become like a Zorro. That's the answer to anonymity, which is kind of awesome. That's a shame I can't drag it, but just like go home, tell your wife you're going to do research. It will be telling your wife because it was only ever men that signed up to this thing in the first place. And then suddenly you can be anonymous. All right, so that's what Ashley Madison tried to do. And, look, it's an interesting sort of approach, but, I probably wouldn't suggest doing that with your real email address and credit card details, which is what a lot of people did, and it didn't work out real well. But in terms of privacy online, on the one hand, we sort of look at this and go, well, the NSA's in our things, like Ashley Madison and all these websites are getting hacked, they're leaking all of our other things. It's all bad news, right? Except it's not entirely bad news, because we've got stuff like this. So anyone know, what does all this have in common? Encryption, exactly, encryption everywhere. And there are different types of encryption, because when we pull out something like the iPhone, right, the iPhone has got encryption in storage. So we just saw the FBI have a really hard time of trying to decrypt a terrorist's iPhone. They had to end up paying $1.5 million to decrypt the guy's phone. Now, I'm quite okay with that. It's interesting, because a lot of people sort of said, well, this is terrible. Apple's got a vulnerability. You can crack the encryption on the iPhone. It's like, yeah, if you spend $1.5 million. So I'm not worried about that, because the FBI can't go and spend $1.5 million on everybody's phone. They've got to just spend it on the phones that are important to them. So iPhone gets it. We also get it on modern-day Androids, on hardware that will support it, encryption in storage. WhatsApp and iMessage get encryption end-to-end. So if I have a chat with any of you on WhatsApp or iMessage, it encrypts on my device, it goes all the way through the wires and the computers and everything in between, gets to your device, and then it decrypts, which is awesome, because nobody in the middle can actually read the traffic. The best bit about all these things, though, because we've had encryption for a long time, but the best stuff about these is this. Everybody gets it. You don't have to do anything. You just pull the phone out and you've got encryption. As soon as that phone comes from Apple or comes from whichever provider is putting Android on it, you get this encryption. And not only does everybody get it, but you don't notice it, right? You just don't feel it. Like any of you with an iPhone, it's not like, gee, it's running a bit crap, maybe it's got encryption. Like, that doesn't happen. It's a really low friction process these days. And it's interesting when you look at the other sorts of encryption we've had over the years. So we've had things like PGP email. I'd ask who actually uses PGP email, but it's going to be like one person with a beard and that will be it, because it's actually really, really hard to do, because you've got to exchange keys, you've got to have the right client. It's a pain in the ass. But those devices and those chat clients all do it by default and you don't even notice it. Now that's awesome, but it also creates this odd sort of disparity. I'll show you what I mean. If I was going to have, say, FaceTime with Ted, FaceTime will end-to-end encrypt. So I can talk to a teddy wearing a bra on his head, and I get encryption from end to end. If you were, say, Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, and you're doing share trades over a normal telephone, you get no encryption. And I know that the Wall Street movie was in the 1980s, but it's exactly the same now, which is kind of the reason why I put it in there. So this very sort of social, easy chatting that happens with WhatsApp, iMessage, FaceTime, all this sort of stuff gets you this beautiful security. And all the important things we're doing as business by default don't, because you don't generally tend to do your share trades over WhatsApp. So we've got an odd sort of disparity there with the way these devices are working. And what's interesting is you look at these things and these phones are sort of everyday items. Like we know how to use the phone, we pick it up and make a call. And now these things are sort of happening implicitly in the background. And it got me thinking about how our expectations of technology are changing. I'll give you a good example. Have a look at your TV. And particularly if you've got kids, have a look at your TV. Now, if they're little kids, a few years old, what's going to be all over the TV? Fingerprints. Because they're trying to drag things on the TV. They're trying to pinch and zoom. They're trying to pause the TV by clicking on the TV. Because that's what they're used to. So this is what my TV looks like. Fortunately, not quite as colourful, but it's got all of these fingerprints all over the thing. Because that's the way the kids have become accustomed to interacting with devices. So for my son, who's 6, the first device he interacted with would have been an iPhone or an iPad. He's never known a time without a screen that he can just touch and do things. And I was thinking the other day, you think back to when I was his age, and you think about how I interacted with TV. The big thing that I always heard from my parents was don't sit too close to the TV. They say you'll get square eyes if you sit too close to the TV. And now we're just trying to strap them onto our face. We have gone the other way, and that's not one TV either, that's 2 TVs strapped right onto your eyes, which is kind of awesome, but it's completely different to what my parents always told me about what TV will do to my eyes. So we're sort of entering this era where we don't necessarily know how the device is going to behave. My kids don't know what they can touch and what they can't touch in order to interact with. And frankly, I don't either. And I see other people do this. I've got 2 laptops there, one I can touch the screen, one I can't. Sometimes someone comes up and they touch the screen that you can't touch and they go, what's wrong with your machine? This is broken. And these days, even when you go and pick a machine up, you're not actually sure what you can do with it. I had this just the other day. I had a friend's machine, and I'm very carefully bending the lid back, and I get to like 180 degrees, and then I'm like, will it go? Will it go? But again, this one will do that one won't. So the technology is constantly changing, and we're not actually sure what to expect. Now, it's one thing for us as adults, and we've seen this evolution of technology, and we've seen the earlier days where screens didn't go all the way back and you couldn't touch them. It's different for kids, though, that haven't sort of gone through that transition and they haven't known many of the technologies that all of us know inside and out and have used for many, many, many years. And I thought I should do a test. What I'll do is I'll grab my 6-year-old and I'll give him a piece of technology that all of you will recognise intimately, and I'll see if he knows what it is.
All right, how old are you now, Ari? 6. So have you ever seen one of those?
Nope.
You don't know what it is? It's a floppy disk.
Oh, it's not even floppy.
No, it's not. What about this? What do you reckon that is?
A USB.
And what do you do with the USB?
You plug it into the computer.
Ah, you put files on it, right?
Yeah.
And did you know we used to use floppy disks before we had USBs? But these USB sticks can now hold up to 700,000 times more than a floppy disk. Isn't that amazing?
And it's true, he had never seen a floppy disk before. But not only had he not seen one, I actually couldn't find one. I was looking all through my cupboard and I got so much crap in my cupboard. I'm sure many of you do. It's like cables and old drives and things like that, and I couldn't find a floppy. I had to ask my wife, and she eventually found one from like 2001 or something with a university assignment. So he hadn't seen the floppy anywhere. But equally, when I said at the end of this, the USB stick can now hold 700,000 times more than a floppy, you can get devices like this. This is a Kingston HyperX Predator. Now, first of all, is that not an awesome name for a USB drive, right? Like if you're shopping for drives and there's a Predator and there's just 1 terabyte disk, what are you going to do? You get the Predator. So that is a 1 terabyte thumb drive, which is kind of amazing, right, to fit like 1 terabyte on a thumb drive. But I reckon it's actually more amazing that you can now fit 256 gigabytes on a micro SD card. So that's a card the size of your thumb, and you can fit 1/4 terabyte on it. You could swallow a micro SD card and not even notice it. I wouldn't swallow the Predator. That looks like it could choke a donkey, that one, so don't give that a go. So you can fit an enormous amount of data on these things, which of course has made the floppy drive redundant, right? We just don't use them anymore. And that's why Ari couldn't recognise it. He had never seen it before. He didn't know what it was. But the funny thing about it is that he had seen the floppy disk before. In fact, he'd used the floppy disk many, many, many times. But what he didn't realise is that every time he used it, it was an icon. So kids are still using these, and the iconography has lived on well beyond what it actually implied. Now, of course, these days we click on a floppy disk and it is saving onto the hard disk, which is syncing via Dropbox to the cloud and replicating instantaneously across all our machines. But the same icon means the same thing, but the kids these days, they've just got no idea what it means. Now, floppy disks were obviously a pretty sort of integral part of everything we did, particularly all the way through until probably the first half of the 2000s. And one of the things that we used floppy disks for extensively was for games. So everyone remember Doom? If you were around as a kid or an adult in the 90s, you would know Doom. Doom launched in 1993, 2 floppy disks, 2 1.44 megabyte floppy disks. A lot of web pages are bigger than the entire first-person shoot-'em-up with all these virtual worlds and aliens and things like that. So it's a massive sign of the times to see how much this has changed. But Doom itself continues to be a really big part of popular culture and indeed a big part of technology. And what a lot of people are doing with Doom these days is they're trying to get it to run in all sorts of unexpected places. So for example, you can run Doom on a Canon Pixmar printer. That is the tiny little screen on the printer. And these guys got it to run. The graphics aren't real great, granted, but it's a freaking printer screen, which is kind of awesome. Now, the significance of this is that if you can run arbitrary software on a printer that has access to device features, imagine what you could get. You print sensitive documents, you scan sensitive documents, copy sensitive documents. It has an internet connection. Use your imagination. You could do a lot when you can start to rewrite firmware on a printer. Now, it's not just printers. We have seen Doom run in other places as well. You can run Doom on an ATM. How cool is that? There's a couple of Aussie guys managed to get it working. Wouldn't that be awesome? You go to take money out. If you want $100, you've got to take down an alien with the chainsaw. $200 shotgun, $400 and above, BFG. Remember the BFG? Oh, the days. So you can run Doom on these machines, but the other big first-person shoot-'em-up back in the 90s was Quake. And you can run Quake on an oscilloscope. The graphics are a bit crusty, admittedly, but I had no idea that an oscilloscope could even do that. people have managed to get Quake running on an oscilloscope, which is amazing. So there's a lot of hacking devices to do things that they were never actually intended to do. And really, there are no limits here. That people get very, very ingenious. So there was a little while back, they found you could run something on a coffee machine. And you think about what the coffee machine like this does, right? It's got the TFT screen so that you can choose whether you want like a latte or a cappuccino, espresso. And you interact with the screen, and then it controls the units inside, and it creates a coffee for you. Here's what these guys got it to do. All right, I won't do it anymore to you. I can't do like a history of internet stuff and not have a Rickroll. So they got to Rickroll the coffee machine, which is kind of cool because you think about the way many of us feel about coffee. Never going to give you up. Never going to let you. I won't do it all. But you could get a coffee machine to actually be Rickrolled, which is really quite amazing. People must have a lot of patience to do this as well, like to reprogram a whole coffee machine. Now, the coffee machine is able to do this because it's got enough intelligence in it that it's got microprocessors and TFT screens and this sort of thing. And what we're trying to do these days is build more and more intelligence into pretty much everything. And we're trying to become more contextually aware of what people are actually doing. And this does date back some way. So we saw Clippy, for example. The much-loved, much-hated Clippy, which would pop up in Microsoft Office 97 through 2003 with very insightful things like this. Would you like help? Looks like you're trying to write a letter. And people hated it because it always got in the way. And they killed it off. Microsoft even did a parody where they eventually killed it and said, Clippy's now unemployed, he's gone, that's it. And the sentiment was good because Microsoft said, let's have a contextually aware character that humans can relate to. And if they can relate to it, then maybe it will be able to help them do their work more effectively. But they killed Clippy. Turned out not to be such a good thing for people. But since then, we've seen a lot of other contextually aware helpers. So, for example, when you go to Google and you do a search, you start to get a lot of suggestions. Now, everybody probably sees this, or something probably quite similar to this, maybe a little bit different when you search. Incidentally, many of these are true as well. Like they are almost as strange as New Zealanders, which is quite interesting. So you go in, you do a search, it finds these sort of things. But what's interesting, and this is the bit that will freak you out, is you go to your home PC, connected to your home internet, signed into Google, and you do a search. And then you go and get an incognito version of Google, go out over like a VPN, and do a search, and see how different the results are. Because it knows so much about you and where you are that it will tailor them very, very specifically. And very often it's using information it knows about you that's actually quite sensitive. So a helper like this in Google has been quite useful. And look, it does work quite well. It does actually help you find results that are closer matched to what you're actually searching for. So that's Google. We've seen helpers come along, such as Siri as well. So we got Siri a few years back, and you can talk to Siri and ask Siri a question. And obviously we still have Siri. It hasn't suffered the same sort of fate as Clippy. And Siri kind of makes sense because when you think about it, you've got this little device which doesn't have a very good keyboard, so you can't do stuff with it. And you can just talk to it, and it will recognize your voice, and it will go away and find stuff. The problem is, though, that Siri doesn't really work well for everyone. It doesn't necessarily work well for me, and I find this quite it's not a racist thing, but obviously it's an anti-Australian sentiment via Siri. And frankly, I hope its chooks turn into emus and kick its bloody dunny door down, because this sort of thing is unacceptable. I still have trouble with Siri. Does Siri work in Norway? Does it work for you guys? Or does it just go, oh? There's a lot of shrugging, so I'm going to take that as a yes, it is problematic in Norway as well. The thing about all these, though, so the thing about Siri and Clippy and Google is that they're not really artificial intelligence per se. They're more, let us give you some contextually aware help, which is okay, but we're trying to move more to an era where the machines actually understand what it is that you want to do and can interact in a much more human-like way. So we're trying to move more towards AI. Now, recently, Microsoft had a great idea. And it was a great idea. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to create a tweet bot, and we're going to call it Tay. And everybody was very excited about the idea of creating this tweet bot. They were ecstatic because Tay was actually very, very good at looking at the way people talk on the internet and replicating their behaviour. So Tay could stand up there and it would be like you're having a chat with a real person on the internet. The problem came when it was actually like you were having a real chat with a real person on the internet. And Tay went completely off the rails. How she managed to combine Bush, Hitler and Trump in one tweet is a little bit beyond me, but she did. And she would do stuff like this. She got worse. She turned out to be quite sexist as well. She learned how to swear. And the real problem is that Microsoft actually did a really good job at building a human-like artificial intelligence tweetbot. And this is kind of the paradox of it, because you look at this and you go, well, first of all, you don't really want anyone talking like this on the internet. Second of all, you really don't want it coming from an official Microsoft account. That's not going to be a good look. But she was good at replicating the behaviour that she saw. But this is now the problem, right? Because you've got to create artificial intelligence that can not only behave like people, but also knows when they're being assholes, so it can try not to replicate that behaviour. Now, all of this is part of this big push to add more intelligence to everything that we do. So how can we make the devices smarter, more contextually aware? How can we make them interact with people? And one of the things that we've been doing, particularly over the last few years, is going towards this thing we call the Internet of Things. This is a very early IoT device. And the idea of the Internet of Things is that we should just connect everything up together, right? It's like this is just a normal old utilitarian device. Let's connect it to the internet and then it will just magically be better. Now I thought what I should do is go away and find some of the things that we're creating that are IoT devices and show them to you here. Now, frankly, I think IoT goes very well with 8-bit Benny Hill because it is a comedy of devices. And you look at some of these and the mind boggles. A connected pregnancy test. What precisely is it going to do? I have seen how these work. They are not complicated. I don't know what adding internet to that actually does. The smart umbrella. What do you reckon that does? It's like, how does an umbrella work? You walk outside, you get wet, you put it up. It's like, that's it. I don't know what connecting the umbrella to the internet is actually going to do. I've actually got no idea. And the problem is that we see so many of these internet devices coming out that you no longer know if it's actually legitimate or not because you're not sure how crazy the whole thing will get. And I'll give you an example. I saw this one recently.
The Wank Band. The first gadget for the wearable tech era that allows men to love the planet by loving themselves.
Now, I'm not sure if in Norway the word wank is very common. So here's a little bit more information about how it works.
The band contains a valve with a small weight inside that generates and stores energy when moved in an up and down motion. And we all know what exercise does that move, right? Now just plug any device you need to charge into the USB port on the band. Smartphone, laptop, camera, tablet, and voila! You are creating dirty energy.
That's terrible. The thing that most offends me is the dirty energy joke. I have seen real IoT things that are less believable than this. And this is what's so crazy about it, because you're just not sure anymore, like, what is the point at which you suspend belief and call the whole thing a hoax? Now, these are what we might call traditional IoT devices. I mean, they've only been around for a couple of years, but it's what we expect of IoT. But there's this new subclass of IoT which is now emerging, which is quite different to the other IoT devices we've seen. Now, I'll explain it like this. If you have ever had a baby, or your partner has had a baby, you may have heard the theory that if you play music to the baby will be born smarter than if you didn't. And assumably you don't play Eminem, you play Beethoven or something like that. And as reasonable people, we might say, okay, I can get that because it sort of stimulates the brain. So maybe what that means is the lady sits down on a comfortable couch somewhere, you turn the stereo up, Beethoven plays, magic happens. Maybe if you're adventurous, you get like headphones and you put them on the belly and you play the music. But IoT has got an answer that is much more direct than any of these options. And this is a new era of IoT called IoT insertables. Now, in case the mechanics of that, you're sitting here going, hang on a second, is this what it looks like? They do have an infographic, and this is where we're going. So this is the subclass of IoT called IoT insertables. Now, we laugh at this because there is an element of this which, let's face it, is kind of amusing. But there's probably a science to it as well, and it's kind of amazing what you can do with IoT these days. Some of the guys down here are looking at this going, oh, at least I never have to use it. There's an IoT for you as well, an IoT insertable for you as well. Now, this is not a thermometer you put in your mouth. I cannot understand the gymnastics of how you would use this, nor do I really want to put my phone in this region. But there is an IoT device for taking your temperature. It is a class of IoT insertable device. Now, what I find really interesting about all this stuff, you know, the sort of uncomfortableness, pardon the pun, the emotionally uncomfortableness of these sort of devices is that they do have really useful medical purposes. And they're purposes which we didn't really see coming. And I kind of think back to these guys. I think back to Julian and Pat. And Julian and Pat were there in the late 70s, early 80s with their Prestel computer connecting to the internet. And back around that era, there were a lot of predictions about what online life would look like in this sort of age, in 2010, 2020, beyond. And Arthur C. Clarke in particular had lots of interesting observations that came true. So he said in his predictions that everybody would have a computer in the home, and they would talk over connections into bigger computers, of which there'd be many in the world, but they'd be sort of these central ones like internet servers. And he said, we will also have the ability to work from home because we'll have these machines and they can talk over the internet. He didn't know it would be the internet at the time, but that's what ultimately happened. He also said we have social networks. We'd be able to communicate with other people. But all of these things are very sort of high-level motherhood kind of objectives. And I don't think that Julian and Pat ever saw the detail of what would come. They never saw the detail of all the IoT things or the insertables. And this is what kind of gets me a little bit excited about what we're all doing here at NDC in terms of learning and the things we're building. And I think about what my daughter, who's 3 years old, will see in the future. So I was about her age when Julian and Pat were doing their thing with the connections. And the really cool thing is I've got no idea what she'll see. We can take broad predictions. Oh, there'll be autonomous cars and all this sort of thing. But we've got no idea what the actual detail will be. And I hope, if nothing else, out of this talk, seeing some of the things that have evolved over time from that starting point back in the late 70s, you sort of realise that we have this awesome opportunity now to create the future in ways that we'd never predicted. And this is the best place to start. So you guys now have 3 days to go and learn totally awesome things and build stuff that we had never expected to see. Thanks very much, everyone.